This is Coach Jason Ballard, and I'm a business wingman. Over the years, I've learned a lot from working in our family construction business, serving as a senior officer in the United States Air Force, and running 12 different organizations around the world. Many people helped me get to where I am today, and it's my mission in life to serve as a personal wingman to others. That's what this podcast is all about, providing knowledge, tools, resources, and mentorship to help people soar to their highest altitude. And welcome back to the Soar Higher podcast. This is your host, Coach Jason Ballard. It's a real honor to be with you today. Got a really cool show lined up for you. Awesome topic that I think everybody is going to be able to connect with, because I think a lot of folks struggle with these types of things. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about how to unleash your creativity, your drive, your innovation, and being able to conquer your next mountain. That could be something personal in your life that you want to achieve. That could be something in your business you want to achieve. Whatever your next mountain is, we're going to talk about how to jumpstart that, how to get beyond maybe where you may be stuck or struggling to figure out next steps, right? We're going to unleash some of your potential you may or may not even know exists, so you can propel to that next level. We have an outstanding expert in this area on the show today. Today we have the privilege of having Dan Steininger on the show. Let me tell you just a little bit about Dan, because he's a pretty amazing guy. Dan's the president of Steininger Associates, which is a business consulting firm based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He's an instructor at the Arizona State University. He's an author of multiple books. The latest one is Conquering Your Mountains, which is about solving problems through innovation. He is a well-renowned leader. He's led many companies all around the world, and is a leadership expert. So Dan, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure to be here, and thanks. And I've listened to many of your podcasts, and I look forward to our interview.
Yeah, I think you're going to be able to offer some amazing tips and all kind of wonderful things. But you have a lot to offer, and I'm excited for you to talk about that and help people that may be struggling with some things today, and help kind of maybe have a breakthrough moment for them. You just never know what you may say or offer to somebody that could be very important to them at that point in time. But Dan, help us get to know you a little bit. Tell us a little bit about you and kind of how you got to where you are today.
I'll be very brief on that, because I agree with you, Jason. My goal is to have your audience, when they finish today, have several tips that can impact immediately their personal and their professional life. So I'll just give you a little story that'll tell you everything. And they can always go to LinkedIn, Dan Steininger, and think Stein, I-N-G-E-R at the end, and check out my bio. But I went to law school on the East Coast in Boston, very good law school, and graduated from law school, returned to my hometown, Milwaukee, and I was practicing for about 10 years. One of my corporate clients, a large financial institution, had all sorts of trouble. The CEO had to step down, and the board asked me to take over. And I thought, what do I know about running a company? I had a lot of friends at the Harvard Business School. I was at Boston University. I said, I was, by the way, a former Peace Corps volunteer, spent 2 years as a teacher in Kenya, East Africa. I thought, I'm not a business guy. I'm a lawyer, and that's it. But anyhow, they asked me to do it temporarily, which I did for almost a year. And finally, they forced me, my partnership asked me, look, buddy, got to make a decision. So I stepped up, took the role of a CEO. And for all of your listeners who are aspiring to be leaders, I was exactly where you were. I'm now the CEO of a large institution. It's got all sorts of problems. And the first question I had to myself is, what's a good leader look like? How am I going to know that? Exactly. Well, all of these many years, I can look back, and I don't take credit for this, but I give your audience a real simple definition and write it down, because it's contrary to what all of us think about leadership. And we think of all these great people like Eisenhower and great business leaders, Jamie Dimon of Citicorp. We all think, oh, wow, these guys are strong and visible and yada, yada, yada. Well, the definition, I don't take ownership at all by myself. I didn't create this. Great leaders are basically best described as having confident humility.
Hmm.
Now, that may seem like an oxymoron. What's that mean? It means that great leaders have a lot of confidence that they're going to get to the right answers for whatever problem and what I call mountains facing the organization or themselves. But they have the humility, they are personally humble enough to realize, I don't have the answers. Now you say, look, take Elon Musk. I mean, he's a great leader. Everyone knows that. How can he be confidently humble? Well, everybody knows that within the last couple of years, he bought Twitter. By his own admission now, he knows he overpaid terribly for it, and it's going to be a long road to try to turn it around. And so this is a great leader making a mistake that bad, cost him into the hundreds of millions. Steve Jobs, one of the iconic leaders of all time, Apple Computers, one of the great companies of the world, market cap, make it one of the biggest. People don't know that in the 90s, when his engineers came up with the idea of the iPhone, he spent the better part of a year, both publicly and privately, trashing them, personally attacking them, saying, I'll never be a phone company. It's never going to happen. That iPhone now represents about 45% of Apple's revenues. So you say, what is confident humility? Well, both these great leaders could have used it, because what it is, it says we get in meetings, and I say to my team, look, I don't know the answers to this. I generally do not know the answers. We need to figure this out. So I'm going to give everybody in the audience a few tips today on what it means to be a confident humility style of management, because that's what great leaders are. In my depth, if you get there, you will be a phenomenal leader. So there we go. That's the game. That's the game plan for today. So get your little tips out, get your sheets, write them down, and when we finish, you'll have a game plan.
Dan, that's awesome. I love it. Confidence and humility blended together.
A confident humility. I mean, I'm confident, but I'm
Yeah,
humble.
that's a powerful combination of two simple words. But boy, only good things can happen if you do that right. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit. I want a little bit of a backdrop here, Dan, as you go through your 5 tips and things about leadership. Where are we at, just holistically, when you think about the workforce? There's a lot of trepidation out there. There's a lot of fears out there. There's a lot of um, change. A lot of things are in transition. There's a lot of areas of the workforce that are just evolving. You're seeing things happening in companies like Boeing, where there's just a massive amount of leadership challenges with some of the issues with the aircraft, and they're trying to get their arms wrapped around that. You've seen issues in the automobile industry, talking about Elon Musk. Here's a guy that completely disrupted the automobile industry. But the Tesla automobile was it took them a long time for that to be profitable and successful. But the current state of affairs, there's just with workforce and hiring people and hybrid working environments and culture, and there's just a lot of what I'm going to call activity, a lot of things in motion out there. And for me, in my simple way of thinking about things, I can boil all of this stuff down, and all the conversations I have with business people, all the conversations I have with my clients around the world, all of these things really boil down to one simple word, and that's leadership. People are struggling with leadership. I'm interested to get your viewpoint on what you see going on. Are we going the right direction? Are we struggling more? Things are evolving faster than we keep up. Like, what is your take on the dynamic today?
Now, Jason, you went right to the core of things. And by the way, you may have missed your calling as a lawyer. You went right to the key issue in this case. Assuming your audience is the jury, you have set the stage for what they need to determine. Will I, the defendant in this case, be able to explain what leadership is in a way? And I'm glad you mentioned Boeing, because it's a classic example. All right, I'll give you an example from my first couple months on the job as the new CEO. We had a meeting, and I'm introducing myself to the team. Most of them knew me, but sort of like there's an expectation that he's the new guy on the block. So what are we going to do? And they turned to me and said, Dan, what's our strategic plan? You're the leader. What's our strategic plan? What do you want us to do? And it was a long pause, and I said, you don't mind my asking, what's the strategic plan? Yes. Now, you can imagine what those 11 vice presidents were thinking, right? whoa, we got a live one on our hands. Man, this is going to be a lot of fun. Now, here's what happened. At some point when they realized I wasn't pulling the leg, I was actually serious. I said, here's the thing. Here's the deal. We're not going to have a strategic plan unless you come up with one. And they began to realize I was serious and that I really wanted them to be responsible for the game plan of the organization. That was a key cultural moment. Everyone expects the leader to know the answers. We're in turbulent times. Look at Boeing. Why is Boeing in trouble? Because their leaders did not have confident humility. They knew the answers. So the people down in the line and those whistleblowers who are emerging kept saying, we told you the problems. We told you what's happening to these fuselages. We told you what's issuing, and no one would listen to us. Therein lies the problem with Boeing. The leadership was confident, but they didn't have humility. So what we're talking about is to all the audience is that this is a shift in paradigm. Great leadership is not about knowing all the answers. Great leadership is about moving responsibility down to the people who actually do the job. And so I'm saying to everybody, it may seem counterintuitive to what you're used to. So I'll give you a good example. When in my youth, and I would hop the train during my college years in summer from Milwaukee and took the Great Northern out to Glacier Park where I got a job and working on the golf course in summer. And for those who haven't seen the Rocky Mountains, they're worth seeing. You come across the plains of North Dakota and Montana and barren. You wake up in the morning and it's an overnight train, and suddenly the Rocky Mountains are emerging from the prairie. And you look at this spectacular thing. The train pulls into the train station at East Glacier, Montana. You get out, you're smelling that beautiful mountain air, and you're thinking, for those of you who know who John Denver was, I'm having my John Denver moment. All right, that's spectacular. Now, fast forward a couple of weeks later, I'm reading the Lewis and Clark journey. And what do you think Lewis and Clark thought when they saw the Rocky Mountains? These stand in between us and getting to the Pacific Ocean. And our journey is going to end right here unless we figure a way to get around, through, and over these mountains. And luckily they came up with, for all the females in the audience, a woman. Her name was Sacagawea. She was an Indian lady who grew up in that region and understood how to find a pass to the Columbia River. So mountains are those problems that all of us have as business leaders in any business or even our life personally. And I always say to my audience that whenever I speak, wherever I talk, if you don't have any problems professionally or personally, please go to a bar and celebrate, or whatever you do to celebrate, because you're very lucky.
It's just a matter of time before they show up, right?
Yeah. So tip number one is when you are faced with a problem, and that probably in business happens just about every day, or personally in your personal life, the first thing to do is to embrace the problem. Take the time to understand your problem. I had a wonderful friend, grew a worldwide company. He had his book about what he said was entitled Americans, Shoot, Ready, Aim. We always want to jump to solution. We want to get to quick answers. We don't want to take the time to understand the problem. So embrace, I say to the audience, write this down, embrace uncertainty. Get everyone to recognize you don't know the answer. Let's first understand the problem. And for all of those do you have any children, Jason, at all or not?
I do. Two daughters.
2 daughters. Okay. And I think you and all your audience knows, and those who have grandkids, your child says to you, Dad, can we have a monkey? And you go through, well, monkey this, monkey that. And then of course, but why, Dad? And you get more stuff. But why, Dad? And this keeps going. This is what you need to tell your team. This is what all of you need to do. Keep asking that question. Why? What are our assumptions? Why is this problem what it is? Get out all the causes of the problem. I'll give you an example of how this can work. I was in a 20-story office building, but I read about a similar situated office building, and there's elevators that went up and down every day. And about 5 o'clock, they were all jammed. They had big waiting lines. You had to wait forever to get out of the building. So the facility manager came to the CEO and said, look, we need to spend several $1 million building some more elevator shafts. So they stood back and spent some time understanding the problem. And when they really studied it, what they found out is that many of the corporate tenants in that building were all departing and work time ended at 5 p.m. So these lines were created on every floor because people were getting off at 5 p.m. So they pulled all the tenants of the building together in a long meeting and decided, let's stagger the departure times. Guess what? Within a couple of weeks, all the lines disappeared, problem solved, and it saved that company millions. So I tell the audience, tip number one, spend the time to understand the problem. And even personally, I have a winter home out in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was hiking last spring. My wife was about 20 yards behind me, and I heard a rattle. There are rattlesnakes in Arizona. And almost simultaneously, I got bit on the back of the leg.
Holy crap.
And I turned around, and he slithered across, and I had a hiking pole. And rattlesnakes don't have ears, but I had hiking poles, and he must have felt the impact because he was off to the side of the trail, thought he was under attack, and nailed me. And it was like lightning. And I turned around, he slithered across the trail, and he's off to the right looking at me like, take that. And I was thinking of whacking him, but I'm glad I didn't because those snakes can bite you 4 or 5 times. Anyhow, I won't go into the details of that particular rescue, but I will guarantee you, well, I will tell one side story, that my creative background helped me survive that. And you're not just going to die that often, but you can lose a limb or not, whatever.
Yeah.
And the first thing my wife did was call 911 and explain I've bitten by a rattlesnake. And and as a result, they brought the antivenom with them. But while we're waiting for the emergency vehicles to come, I turned and said, I was an Eagle Scout, a Boy Scout, in fact, and an Eagle Scout. I learned you need to suck out the venom. Well, she looked at me like, divorce first. And so I said, okay, but I'm going to write my funeral oration right now. And it's going to say, I died because you wouldn't suck out the venom. Well, sure enough, she got her water bottle out. And if you've seen the movie True Grit, whether John Wayne or Jeff Bridges, she put it on the water and sucked out some of the venom and whatever else. It wasn't pleasant, but she did it. Then I get to the helicopter, and the helicopter pilot comes out. They checked my vitals. I was able to walk to the helicopter, and the helicopter pilot says, hi, I'm Captain Kirk. I said, you're Captain Kirk? Well, what kind of day I'm having? I'm the Easter Bunny. Anyhow, I'm rising up over Phoenix. My leg is now starting to expand from the pain. And by the way, the pain starts in about an hour because the rattlesnake will kill all the tissue around it. And I turned to Captain Kirk and said, boy, this is really starting to hurt. He said, well, we'll give you some fentanyl. I said, fentanyl? Don't you die of that? Anyhow, he said, no, we won't give you the Mexican cartel fentanyl. So anyhow, get to Banner Hospital in Phoenix, largest hospital system, and the top toxicologist of the state of Arizona visits me. And she says, I needed to see you because you're a special case. I said, I don't like the sound of that. She says, oh, no, it's good. You have less venom in you than the average rattlesnake bite victim, and we're trying to figure out why. Well, I told him about the story about my wife Judy, and what she had done. And she says, well, our longitudinal studies don't always say this and that. I said, well, you ever explain why I have less venom in me and how the cowboys, the ranchers, and the miners survived when they didn't have antivenom? Anyhow, so I recovered. Maybe 4 or 5 weeks later, I can walk again because you can't even walk. Your leg is so small. And it's horrible.
Yeah.
So I'm flying up to Portland. I'm at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, Arizona. Like, this is 5, 6 weeks later. And people are coming up to me and saying, how's your rattlesnake bite? And I said, what are you talking about? Oh, you were on the evening news. You're the first person they brought antivenom to the field. And now they've changed all their practices. So my point to the audience is that taking the time to understand the problem, get creative with the solution, probably saved a limb or two. It certainly saved my life if that was in danger. So what you learned today is going to help you survive even some terrible challenges to your life. So number one. So number two is, let's get us to tip number 2. That is, once you know and have listed all the causes, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say your car doesn't start. Okay. Is it a dead battery? Is it you forgot to put gas in it? Did you leave the fob in the house? I mean, who knows? You list all those causes. So write them down. What are the causes of the problem? I mean, or if let's say it's an opportunity. So I'm going to pursue a new device or a new product, or we're going to disrupt the marketplace. Okay, what's the problem we're trying to face in order of opportunity? And what are those opportunities? What are the problems we need to solve with our new invention? And get those all listed and list them down. And it's called a Pareto chart. It's named after an Italian mathematician from, I think, the 16th century. And you list those down in order. And then now you know the causes. And now you pick the largest single cause. That's going to be your attack point. That's going to be where you're going to start trying to solve it. So this is very systematic. Spend the time to understand the problem. Ask 5 whys like a little kid does until you've listed all those causes. Then you do a Pareto chart in order of the problems. And guess what? It's happening during this meeting. your team, whatever that team is, whatever you are in the structure, is watching you and realizing they're the ones that are having to solve this problem, and they're helping to find it. And you put a cause and effect diagram, and they're all helping you figure this out, and they're beginning to participate and take ownership of the problem. One sidebar on why that's important: early in my career as a CEO, and again, not knowing what I should do. Too bad I didn't know you, Jason. I would have hired you. Coach me, Jason. I need help. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm reading in the Wall Street Journal that Nissan had built its first plant in Smyrna, Tennessee, the first car company they put in America. And the Wall Street Journal reporter was interviewing the CEO, who was Japanese. He had an interpreter. And it was clear throughout the interview, the reporter was getting more and more frustrated. And probably the CEO finally said, "Look, what's the matter? Why you seem so frustrated?" He said, "I am. I keep asking you how to build the cars and I'm not getting the answers." And he said, "Well, why are you asking me? I'm just the president. Go out to the assembly line and ask the people who are building the cars. They're going to tell you." I flew down there the next week, and there were people there. There were some of the people on the tour we took whose their sons and daughters worked at this Nissan plant. And they said they'll never go back to GM, ever. In fact, I wrote a piece that was in University of Michigan's review saying it's all over for the American auto industry. And of course, GM did file for bankruptcy and reorganization. Again, who's supposed to be responsible for carrying out? Think of Boeing. How is that happening? Because the people who were building those aircraft knew what was going on, knew what was wrong, and leadership didn't get them involved. So bottom line, folks, your leadership style will be quite contrary to the paradigm of American leadership, but it's going to be highly effective. And you're going to take more pride and joy as the people who work for you will. They won't be working for you. They'll be working for the customers. They'll be trying to solve problems that make those customers take delight in your products or services. So there you go. So Pareto chart, and there we go. Now we got the structure. So we're going to go to tip number 3. Unless you've got some questions, Jason. I'm sorry, I get wound up and I can't stop.
You are on a great roll, Dan. Keep going. Number 3.
Tip number 3. Now here is really important. We all heard of brainstorming. We've all heard of ideation. That's how you come up with new ideas. So, Jason, I've listened to you, so I know the answer to this. Where do you get your creative ideas? When do they come to you?
When you bring really smart people together and have a fruitful conversation and start, methodically going through that and, throwing spaghetti on the wall, brainstorming, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. But when different people from different walks of life, from different vantage points of the organization, inside or outside of the organization, are able to understand the vision, where they want to go, what they want to do, and what the end state is they're trying to achieve, or what problem they're trying to solve, whatever that is. And you get all of those people on the same page, understanding that, and then, bringing all of that innovation, all of that brain power experience, to bear in a very open and friendly environment where, there are no bad ideas. Great things come out of that. That's my experience.
Okay. And I think you have proven that. But I want to and I'm going to return to that because you've articulated it perfectly for the actual meeting itself. But I want to step back and ask you, just as a person, let's forget about business. When do you get your most creative ideas? When do they come to you? Not in the middle of a podcast, but when do you personally, in your personal life, when do most creative ideas come to you?
For me, and the kind of person that
Yes.
I am, those really come to me. It come to me in a couple different ways. One, when I have time to slow down and have some solitude, reflect, and think through things without being distracted, without a bunch of noise and things going on around me. A lot of things come, at least from me in that perspective. And then the other side of that coin for me is when we get some really hearty conversation with the right people in the room, where we feed off of each other. So it's, for me, it's a little bit of both. I like to think through things, have
Mm-hmm.
conversations about it, think through it again, have some more conversation. So it's a process for me.
Okay. So you have defined perfectly. You solved tip number 3. Um, when I talk to audiences, I ask them, when do the best ideas come to you? I'll get in the shower. And when I'm quiet, Steve Jobs was famous for going for walks. I'm a swimmer. I get them when I
Yeah.
swim. I wake up at 1 a.m. and I've got new ideas. I mean, rarely do people say, I'm in a meeting and I suddenly have all these creative breakthroughs. They usually get it elsewhere. And why? And it gets right to your point about solitude. Very simply, all of us in our heads up here have a what we call an executive function in the frontal lobe of our brain, in the cortex. And that's that executive function that sees all the incoming. When you're in the Air Force, you see a plane coming at you, whatever. You see advertising coming. You see oncoming traffic. This is ongoing all the time, constantly all day long. Your brain is on overload, navigating all these ideas. What you need to do to be creative is turn off, as you have suggested, that executive function. And how do you do that? You turn off the cell phone, you go for a walk, you do whatever, you get quiet, you go for a long drive, you're quiet. And once that quiet occurs, your executive function turns off. You know, when you sleep at night, you got nightmares, weird, you wake up, you're having these weird dreams. And you know why? Because that executive function up in your brain has turned off. There's no governor on it. And wham, out come all the creative ideas from your brain. That's number one. So the first thing you need to do is understand why American corporations are failing to create great brainstorming. Because they go into a brainstorming meeting expecting people to have all their insights during the meeting. So here's tip number one in brainstorming. Send an email out saying, we've defined the problem. Here it is. Let's restate the problem, all the causes, the Pareto chart. Give it some thought and let us know by email some of your ideas before the next meeting. So that's tip number one. Okay, so people can go away and, as you said, be solitude, think about things away from the problem. And guess what? Ideas are going to start to come to them. And now the second reason you want to do that is because most Americans, when they get into a brainstorming meeting, guess what? 50% of the people in that meeting will be introverts. They don't want to speak up. And there'll be few people who are extroverts will dominate the meeting. And guess what? Their ideas are pursued. Well, Harvard the business school does a study, and I don't know if they still do it, where you're hypothetically in an airplane, it crashes somewhere in the wilderness of Alaska. And you've got only a few hours to select those items. I don't know if the Air Force does this thing, but you have only a few hours to select the items you need to survive. And they did, and then they film it. And this is done at the school. And when they were playing it, they noticed one of the folks in that class wasn't saying anything. And they finally turned to him and said, we noticed you didn't say a single word during this whole meeting. Why? And he said, well, I'm kind of shy. I don't like to speak up in a meeting, yada, yada, yada. And I said, okay, well, we'll forgive you. Please tell us what you think of what we selected. And he said, oh, you probably won't survive 2 days. And I said, what? Why do you say that? Oh, I grew up in the wilderness of Alaska. I know what you need, and you picked the wrong things. What I'm saying is that there's another fatal flaw with brainstorming. You get introverts, or half of the people in that room, and they're not going to want to speak up. So by getting an email solicitation from them in advance of the meeting, everyone can think about their ideas, not just the extroverts, not just the loudmouths. So, Jason, you've hit it perfectly. Solitude's important, but when you actually get to the meeting, you can feed off each other. But it's a better process when you've been able to think about their ideas in advance of that meeting. So now you can have a more productive discussion because the people you wouldn't have heard from are now going to have their ideas vetted out, as that young man from Alaska did. So there you go. So and then the other thing I say is as ideas start to come, you put them on Post-its and you start filling up that room. And even when you're at home and ideas come to you, put them up on Post-its on your refrigerator, wherever you want to put ideas, and keep coming back to them. The more ideas you come up with, the better you're going to have. If you put 10 in play, you'll get 2 or 3. If you put 20 or 30 or 50 in play, you get a lot more. So keep putting them up for days on end till you get a lot of ideas to select from. So anyhow, that's tip number 3 on how American corporations are failing on brainstorming, tragically, because of those two things. They don't recognize that most creativity comes when you're alone, as you said, in moments of solitude, whether it's a shower or walking or swimming or in your car, who cares? Second, in the actual meeting, introverts won't talk up very easily. And one other thing you can do once the conversation gets going and getting back to the 5 whys, people may still be a little reluctant to talk up. One of the things you can get them to talk is can everyone ask questions that we haven't thought about yet? In other words, here's our assumptions. Is there something wrong with our assumptions? And get people asking questions, because then they don't feel as intimidated. They're not responsible for being criticized for an idea. Oh, we thought of that. That's too much money, whatever. Ask some questions. All right. So there's tip number 3 on how to create a consistent, simple brainstorming session. And now one other tip in that brainstorming session. I want everyone you're not going to believe this, but I'm going to prove it to you. I want you to understand that in a meeting like that, the most important thing you can insist on is the use of humor. And humor, what has that got to do with a business meeting? We're trying to come up with a new breakthrough product like an iPhone. Okay, let's take us back thousands of years to when we were running around the plains of Africa, because that's where human race really started, maybe actually more like 150,000 years ago. And we're out in the plains of Africa, and we see a group of people coming at us with spears, or an individual, who knows. Now, you didn't have a cell phone. You didn't have email. You couldn't call them. You didn't have text. How do you know that person is not going to kill you or harm you, right? What our ancestors did, and anthropologists have figured this out, is signaled humorous things. Maybe they did a weird dance or something to show, I'm friendly. Don't spear me. Okay, now, what humor does is it moves you from your left analytical brain, which everyone is on right now, is listening to this, into your right brain. That's the source of creativity. Number one, so there's a purpose of humor. It relaxes you, almost like when you're having solitude, to start to feel and let your right brain take over with ideas. There's a second thing. When you ever get in these meetings, I know I've been in meetings as CEO, everyone's watching me, so I always get an outside facilitator because I realize people are doing what I want. I want someone else to lead that discussion. Nevertheless, there's a lot of class going. I got the supervisor there, my director, I'm really worried about embarrassing myself. What humor does is it breaks through the class distinctions. For example, when I'm living, I have a home here in Milwaukee, I have one in Phoenix. Let's say there's a crew outside doing construction work, or other folks are coming by to pick up the refuge or whatever. I'll walk out and they look at me like, oh yeah, here's a guy with a big house. We know what he's like. And I'll go up to him, I'll say, I'm from Wisconsin, so bear with me, folks. Did you see the Packers last night? Did you see Brett Favre throw another interception at the wrong time in the playoffs of all times? 2 minutes later, we're all best friends. Humor cuts through class. So we got everything. We got YouTube humor. We got TikTok. You can play little video clips. Everything even have signs up in your conference room. Sacred cows make great hamburgers. Anything to get people relaxed, enjoying themselves, having fun, and they'll never forget those sessions at work. I came home boy, did we have a heck of a day today. I was laughing my head off. So build it into the creative brainstorming process. And trust me when I tell you this, it will dramatically enhance the ideation process. So there we go. So that's tip number 3. The audience is getting there. Now, tip number 4. And by the way, I would suggest that you capture all the ideas now. Now you've got them all down. You got 20, 30, 50, whatever it is. How do you decide what you want to do? They all look good, right? I mean, what's good, what's bad, what's not going to work? At the heart at the depth of the Depression, FDR addressed the nation, as everybody knows. And I never did. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I never did quite understand that, but I know what fear is. When I'm just outside of is it Dill Air Base in Phoenix, and those F-35s are flying over. That's what fear is to me. I'm gonna get in those things.
Fear could be being bit by a rattlesnake too. I think most people are scared of snakes, so you definitely understand that for sure.
FDR told the nation, "We're going to embark on bold experiments." He didn't say, "I have the answers." We're going to do bold experiments. So now we're at a point where we've got all these ideas. How do you decide what you're going to do? Okay, so what you do, and this you can apply in your personal life as well. For personal things, you want to go on a vacation, you have all these places listed, you want to buy a car. What's the criteria you're going to judge your ideas by? let's take, everyone buys cars, right? Or rents cars or leases them, all right? You go to 4 or 5 dealers, every car you got into from every different dealer felt great, seemed good. For the most part, you seem to like them. How do you decide which car you want? And everyone has a deal you can't refuse, right?
Hmm.
Okay, here's criteria. What do I want? The cheapest car? The least costly? Do I want one with the best gas mileage? Do I want one that looks just beautiful and I want to show it off? That's okay. Do I want safety first? What is the criteria in order of importance for me? So list that down. I want a very fuel efficient car. That's number one, and you weight it. That's it gets 5 points. Okay, well, I want, but I also want safety. So we put that as number 2. You weight it at 4 points. So each criteria gets weighted. So you put the column of the criteria on one side, and then you put car A, car B, car C, car D, and you put the numbers next to them. Okay, this car is good, but it's too expensive, and I don't want to spend that one. Expense is number 3, and you put the number next to each. When you finish the columns, you add them up, and it'll point to the most logical selection that you should pursue. And the beauty is, again, to the audience, you're involving your team. They're participating in developing the criteria, not you, the leader. You're leaning on them. They're going to see things that you don't see. As Boeing's leadership never understood, is the people building the airplanes know more than they do about what needs to be done. Exactly. So you got the criteria, you finish it. That's tip number 5. I mean, just you want to go on a vacation, list all the vacation spots. Now, what do you want? Do you want to spend a lot of money? Or do you want a place that has a lot of activities for your kids if you're going to take them with you? Put the criteria down. It'll help you. How much time do you have? It'll help you select what you're going to do. Now, the last and final thing is implementation. So now, important. Again, you've got the things that are saying that's the best, but now test your ideas. If you're in product or innovation of services, you test those ideas to see how the marketplace responds. Good example. There was a small company in Australia that wanted to do wine, and they evaluated the market and found that they decided, well, we got to be different. So they interviewed beer drinkers and mixed drinkers and said, well, why don't you drink wine? And what they found is that people said, well, they have all these labels and I don't understand them. It's too sophisticated and it's pricey. And on top of it, I don't always like the taste. So they decided we're going to simplify the whole thing. And they came up with two wines, red and yellow. And then they made them, very reasonably priced, made it a little better so it was more palatable. And they launched it. That wine company grew the fastest of any wine company in the entire history of the wine industry. And it was called Yellowtail. Mm. And you can find it in any wine store anywhere in the country today. Yep. Again, so they tested things. You want to talk to customers about your ideas. I started an organization that helps entrepreneurs launch companies called BizStarts. We say, you may love your product. You may think it's great, but you have to test it. And so see what the customers say. And then when you find what, as they did, you pour fire on it. So there's the opportunity. I will say that, and so with that said, now you've got the 5 tips. If you want to be, and by the way, when you finish, you're going to find out that the people who work for you or report to you as a leader are going to love the culture. They were valued. And you've talked about that, Jason, in some of your other podcasts that I've listened to, the importance of, but how do you make sure they feel important and they're respected? This tells them that you're in charge of making these decisions, folks, and I'm trusting you to do it right. And believe me, there's great satisfaction as they solve these problems and innovate. They get the joy. I always say to people, and I'll end this with this. Think about, everyone asks me, do you have to be born creative? And I said, let me tell you something. Everybody is born creative. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, how about your daughters? Question, Jason, when your daughters were really young, I mean, like a month, let's say 3 or 4 months, did you have to tell them they should start trying to crawl?
Nope.
Did you bribe them?
Nope.
Then and we put toys down. You said, you have to play with those toys or you're not going to eat tonight, right? And then they started to get up and try to walk. Did you say, well, you better start learning to walk or you're in deep trouble with me? No. Or you didn't bribe them. And then eventually they did something. It's the most complex thing that a human can ever do. And it's all over by 5. They learned to talk. And Jason, if anything, you had to try to quiet them. And they talked gibberish for a while, but they eventually learned how to talk. Guess what? We're all born creative. We all have this creativity in us when we're little children. So what happened to us? Why aren't we as creative when we're at this age? You know why? I asked the audience, what happens to you when you get to school? What does the teacher say? Let's get creative, or does the teacher say, here's the answers you're going to have to answer, right? So you succeed in school by getting the right answers, right? And then you graduate to the work world. And when you get to the work world, let's say it's the Air Force. I don't think you went in an Air Force class. You know, sir, I think I have a better idea of how to fly this plane. I don't think we should do what you're saying. Jason, military court martial for this guy.
Yeah.
so you get on the work world. So what I'm telling everybody is how we can get back to people tapping their inner creativity, which you come by naturally. And so people will take the great joy in helping create answers and solutions to things. So there we go, Jason. I've worn myself out. I have a couple of tips for them. And by the way, if they don't know this stuff or they get confused, you can always just go to LinkedIn, Dan Stein, think beer Stein. That's not hard. And add INGER at the end, Steininger. And, send me a message. I'll be happy to chat with you. It won't cost you anything. And you can have my newsletter, which I do twice a month, on creative tips. So I can, if you get stuck, reach out. I love doing this stuff. I love helping people. So there you go.
Dan, thank you so much for being on the show, man. You are a class act. You're a world-renowned, expert in leadership. He didn't talk much about his background, but Dan's led one of the fourth largest financial firms out there. He's on the boards of many institutions like the Better Business Bureau, et cetera. Just a real good, classy guy that I appreciate you coming on the show and sharing a lot of this wisdom so other people can take this knowledge. I think we are struggling to be creative, think outside the box. I think COVID really magnified and shined a light on that of how deep these issues really are, because everybody's got technology all around them all the time. And if they can't find something on Google or the internet or in some computer system, people struggle to problem solve, right? And problem solving is not about instant gratification and instant speedy things, right? I think you highlighted that there's a process for what you need to take people through to figure out the best answers to the toughest problems that we face. And business problems are not getting easier. They're getting more complex. They're getting more dynamic in nature. You can't just make a fast decision to move on, back 40 years ago like you could then, right? So it takes focus and intentionality to think through that, and patience and discipline, right? And so, Dan, thank you so much for being on the show. You have really given the audience a lot of meat on the bone here to go take and run with and do great things. If folks want to talk with you, I know you mentioned your LinkedIn site. They want to learn, talk with you, meet you, work with you, whatever. How do they get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to do that?
The easiest way, and it's just so simple. Just go to LinkedIn, type in my name, Dan Steininger, like I said, Stein, INGER at the end, and just send me a message. And if you want to call, just put your phone number, whatever you want to do, an email. It doesn't make any difference. Just text me the message. Happy to chat with you. And again, I have a bi-monthly newsletter. You can have it. You can sign up for that. If you go to LinkedIn, just click on one of my most recent one was, would you quit 133 feet from your goal of reaching the top of Mount Everest? Would you do that? And yes, it's a true story. It's the story of a woman who got to within 133 feet of the top of Everest and turned around. And it's all about, sometimes there's a reason you shouldn't achieve a goal. Anyhow, that's a bi-monthly newsletter. And by the way, I want to tell everyone what I've shared with you to be a great business leader, and it will change the culture of your company when everyone follows this game plan. But it also applies. As I told Jason early, I spent 2 years of my life in Kenya, East Africa. At one point, I got malaria. Now, in the village we were in, there were no doctors. You can die of malaria. It's a big killer worldwide. That's when I had to step back and think, what am I going to do to save my life? And I put all the things I talked about in play, and finally concluded, well, there are some missions in our area. Maybe one of them knows some knowledge about this. They don't have any doctors. And I found an Italian mission of all things, some nun who knew right away, she didn't speak any English, a little bit of Swahili, but she was able to communicate. You have malaria. And she had a needle because she had treated a lot of the locals and gave me a shot. And guess what? By the next day, I'd broken the fever, or I wouldn't even be here to give this. So these things can help you in emergencies, whether it's malaria, a rattlesnake, or just a terrible loss in your life, whatever it is. Here's some tools you now can use, and you can drive to those creative solutions to your mountains, whatever they are, personal or professional. So, Jason, thank you for having me. Oh, by the way, I can now add to that bio, I've been on a world-class podcast with Jason Ballard.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm humbled that you would refer to it like that. I appreciate that. Dan's the author of Conquering Your Mountains, Your Next Mountain, and he's given you some great takeaways from the book and other learnings that he's developed from his time in as a leader in the world. And so I encourage you to go read the book, connect with Dan on LinkedIn, his websites, and all of those things. And he's just an awesome guy and can do a lot of positive things for you. That is it for today's show, folks. What a great show! And I think if you apply these 5 main principles that Dan shared with us today, understanding the problem, really going deep into the problem, and in embracing all of the problem, not just the symptoms of the problem. Get to the root. I think number 2, identifying your largest root cause of why it's a problem in the first place. How did this happen? How did we get to where we are? Was it by accident, or was it, by intention? Number 3, embrace quiet and solitude. Those are positive things in this world where we're surrounded by noise 24/7. Turn it off. Give your brain a break to focus and concentrate on the task at hand, and embrace the people that you have around you, inside your firm, outside of your firm, in your network, in your world, your church, your family, or whatever, to bring people together for a common cause and objective where they can be in a safe place to share ideas, put all those ideas out there, and not take any friendly fire in the process, right? I think that's very important. I think number 4, the criteria for which you're making these decisions. I think that was really, really critical. Weigh the pros and cons of all of your options. Make sure you fully understand the cost, the timeline, the dangers, the risks, all of those things that are really important to making a good decision. Because in business today, this isn't a decision for today. It's usually a decision that's going to affect people in the organization for many, many years to come. So the decision needs to be carefully thought through, or it could be a fatal decision. And number 5, pull the trigger. Don't be afraid, once you've done your due diligence, to pull the trigger, put something in play. Don't procrastinate. Don't overthink it. And then monitor that and measure that, and make sure the outcome you're trying to achieve is going to be achieved. And so I would just say all of this holistically. This is about engagement. If you want to be a great leader, if you want to drive creativity and culture and problem solving, you want to be innovative on the leading edge, you don't need to go out and buy millions of dollars worth of technology and fancy, Harvard law
Right.
degree people. You just need to engage yourself and them together in these types of ways. And I think when you do that, the end result will be a confident and humble group of people that will do amazing things. And so, and then along the way, add in some humor.
Yeah.
I found it ironic. Dan was talking about humor today, and humor is very closely aligned with humility, right? Like the more humorous you can be about yourself, the more humorous you can be with each other as a team. um you know allows everybody to be grounded and laugh at themselves a little bit as they make mistakes and say funny things.
Right. Exactly. Well
And
said.
that brings the team together in a very engaged, confident manner. And when you do that, you're going to win. You're going to win every single time, as Dan says. So that's it for today's show. Next week, another awesome show in store for you. We're going to learn about what we dread the most, aging, getting older, how to do things differently and live a more fulfilled life as we are getting older and wiser, and the world around us is changing and evolving very, very fast. So great discussion there. Look forward to having that with you next week. Have a great week, everybody.